that's respectable enough to kind of fuse with that thesis. And so the reality is if something like this really takes off, you want to be in a position to where it took off enough to change your life, but if it goes to zero, it's not going to affect your life.
Yeah,
that's the happy medium. And if you don't have that happy medium, I just don't think that you're going to be able to hold through. Like, I've never met anybody that held these that was like all in. It was always like a position size that was respectable enough for them to be like, I don't care, until it became large enough to where they did care. And if it ever got to a point where it was life-changing to you, at that point, it might be worth actually taking something off the table. Now, in regards to like, what would I have done differently? Well, first of all, you know, my position size was astronomical for a Dogecoin replica. You know, it was larger than I intended. Instead of letting the thesis play out, I overmanaged the hell out of it. I missed the forest for the trees. Second, there was no written thesis that could hold me grounded for the entire 3 months that I held it down 70 to 80%. Every day, the idea eroded in my mind like an option that has quick time decay. Every idea that you have that's great has a time decay associated with it like an option. Yeah. If any of you guys trade options, you know that every day that you don't, essentially it's like a habit. Every day that you don't work out, the probability that you work out the next day becomes lower and lower and lower. It's the same thing in regards to wonderful theses that you have. It's not the fact that good ideas are hard to come across. They are hard to stick to for majority of people. And, you know, third, I let other people talk me out of my thesis that they had no data or vision for. I'm the one that built the idea and the thesis. Why would I have let anybody talk me out of it? So I valued other people's ideas and opinions, and they had no data to back up why it wasn't a good idea. And so fourth, I believed I didn't need the money, even if it took off, because I was already closing in on mid-low seven figures at the time, and it was a mental nuisance to manage. It was a mental nuisance because of position size. And there was a shame associated in losing 200K on a Dogecoin replica if anyone found out. Like, I was telling everybody about this, right? From friends to family. And so like everyone was always asking me, how is your Dogecoin replica doing? And the shame started to set in. And so there was a bit of, you know, probably would have been better to operate more in silence and have a lower position size in regards to how I was maneuvering that position. Because it was cutting edge in regards to thinking that memes would take off. I mean, people at that time, I mean, they knew about unit bias, small coins like Virgin, whatever, were taking off, but like, it wasn't as popular as it is today to seek out meme coins that could go 1000x. It was still like early stages of identifying behavioral cycles in that realm. Now, I could get into the whole fact that I think like Shiba Inu was a inside job. I'm not going to get into that, but like, I do not think that you can pump something up that high and that fast. I don't think there's ever been anything in the history of markets in general that has moved that, like, after I sold, 3 months later, the bag was worth like over $100 million. I don't think, like, I think history will have something like that, or future will have something like that repeats again. But to that extent, I don't know. You know, to that extent, I don't know. So those are the four things that I would have done differently. I didn't write down anything at the time. Everything was in my head. I thought I was good enough to just have these ideas in my head and manage it in my head as time went on. But the reality is life happens. You know, you have a bunch of moving parts in your day-to-day life. And the last thing that's going to be on your mind as the days move on is this damn Shiba Inu thesis, right? I was managing Ethereum, Bitcoin. I was managing Solana. There was so many other positions I was managing that like I was overburdened by these other positions. And I felt like I don't really need this extra nuisance. Again, it would have been solved with position size. So what would I do now if I was to find a similar trade setup again, something like Toshi? So these are the things I would do differently now. Position size absolutely must be accounted for. You can't trick yourself into holding 10% without emotions. It won't work. You really have to risk what you're comfortable with vaporizing right in front of you. You are not the exception to the rule, so do not even try. I would have a written thesis and be grounded in that when inevitably the chart tries to eject me, because it will. Volatility is the price to pay for an asset that can go 100x or 1000x, no two ways about it. I would scale out at logical levels to reduce anxiety, but no taking out initial on a double or anything like that, because it would severely alter the trajectory of that bag. At a 10x, I would shave my initial at the very least, 10% to take my initial out, whatever, sleep a little bit better at night. It's not going to change the trajectory of the bag that much. And that being said, you can't just have arbitrary targets as 10x, 50x targets. They have to make sense regarding market cap and other data points regarding how much equity is coming into the DEX versus historically where Ethereum and BTC are at. Reason why I say that is because last cycle, Shiba Inu marked the top of the entire market flat out. other data points, search trends, TikTok sentiment, etc. It can't just be some arbitrary 10x or 50x target like you're at some casino. There has to be a logical explanation as to why this exit makes sense. And the similarities that I see and the differences between SHIB and Toshi is that Uniswap was new at the time, Base is new today. We talked about virgin markets and exchanges that produce wild speculation, back from Poloniex to Binance to Uniswap to Base. I mean, just an example, this market cycle, we had, for the first time, we had the Orca DEX, and like you had these meme coins that popped up and flourished on top of Solana based on the house money effect, as you say, on top of Solana. That was like, I'm not going to give the names, but you had two that like took off. It was like 1,000x or 2,000x or something even crazier. And so like history already repeated again, and it will happen again. And so like when equity comes back to Ethereum and you have a house money effect return to Ethereum, I think Base is properly set up to be that same, again, as Mark Twain said, history rhyming but not repeating exactly the same. I think that we can make a case for the pattern recognition for why Base could be where that is, and for why Toshi could be that next 100 or 1,000x. Now, what that looks like in between today and that moment is a lot of potentials for ejection.
Yep. It's
not going to be easy to hold. There is no free money. Like, you can't think that even with a meme coin, like, I'm just going to put a bit of money here and it's going to be 100x for me. No. Like, unless you're legitimately gambling, you need to be grounded in something. So at the time, Toshi right now has a market cap, if I'm not mistaken, of 36 million. Yep. The last time I looked at it, when I originally picked up SHIB, it was below $100 million market cap, and I think even below that. I think it was like it was enough to where 100 to 200K could buy 2% of the supply. And the speed of the market cycle matters. Like, this could go back into hibernation for months before really seeing momentum. It doesn't mean that the thesis is invalid. If you have a properly allocated position size, what do you care about the time it takes? The real ejective factor here is that most people can't hold a ridiculous cat or dog coin for 10 to 12 months if need be. They just can't logically get themselves to do it. You need to be grounded in a logical, sound thesis with a proper allocated equity allocation in order to weather the storm. People literally sell Bitcoin bottoms because of volatility and fear. You think you're just going to magically hold something without putting in the proper foundational work when it will have even more volatility than Bitcoin? A really big part of what we do is fighting instincts. The data is there. Livermore, as we talked about with the Livermore quotes in regards to nothing being new and speculation as old as the hills, and that applying to alts and meme coins, and that humans operate in cycles. They can't help themselves. Your job is to identify these cycles and extract the value where the herd is providing it. Livermore, also famously said, as we said, patterns repeat because human nature hasn't changed for thousands of years. Men who can be right and sit tight are uncommon. I found it one of the hardest things to learn. So it's you ejecting yourself out of a good thesis. How many times have I heard from people, I had this great idea, but I didn't play it? The reality is, and I'm reciting so much Livermore because someone I've learned a lot from, it doesn't matter what you said you were going to do in the stock market. It matters what you did. And it's the same thing about crypto. It doesn't matter what you said you were going to do, what you thought was going to happen. What did you do? That's all that matters. And having good ideas and a sound thesis is half the equation. The other half is getting out of your own way to let ideas actually play out to maturity instead of over-managing and turning it into a helicopter parrot on your position. So I think that, when I take a look at the bulk of what had happened over the course of these last few years, I've learned a lot from these moments, but the reality is that if you don't learn from those lessons, the second time you make that mistake, it's a choice. It's a choice. You're now choosing to not learn from the lesson, but the reality is if you learn from the lessons of the past, your trajectory for success is now, it's like you've already succeeded on a long enough time frame. You just are letting time catch up with it. So that's essentially the bulk of what I learned from that moment and experience in my life. I'll leave this one last thing about it that's a little bit in a deviation in regards to what we're talking about. I had wrote in my journal, I have an affirmation journal. You can believe it or you don't believe it. I really don't care. I think it's mental programming. I had an affirmation journal when I lost everything. I had 30K left, and I was writing down I was going to have $10 million in a 5-year period. Didn't know exactly how at that moment in time, but I knew that my eyes were set on that target. When I realized that I was closing in on 8 figures without Shiba Inu, part of me was like, why do I need to even play this? Like, this is a mental nuisance. I don't need it. No clue that like I was going to be leaving 50 to 100 mil on the table. At the same time, you could be down so bad, but then in 3 to 4 or 5 years have an opportunity that's over $100 million. So it's like, there is like literally no reason to ever give up wherever you are at in life, whatever position you're in life, because you literally you don't have the foresight to see the opportunities 3 to 5 years forward can provide. There's going to be a lot that happens, a lot of variables that come up, a lot of opportunities. Sure, you're going to miss some, but at the same time, you really only need to capture one of these opportunities to forever change your life. Like every millionaire I know has something in common. They've all missed an opportunity over 10 million. Every millionaire I know has that same story in common, that they could have had 100, they could have had 50, they could have done this, they could have done that. But the reality is they're looking in the right place. And now it's just a matter of time before you execute on that. So I'll leave it off with that. At the same time, there is a badge that I carry that no loss will ever amount to that, which is a good thing. I've turned it into a good thing. No missed opportunity will ever amount to what happened there. So now I'm numb to everything. And it's a fantastic thing because now I can actually be unburdened from the emotional repercussions of whatever the market does to me. So I carry that badge of honor. I'm going to turn it into a win. And we're looking for next opportunities. You know, I used that lesson to pay attention to Bonk this cycle. And Bonk went 40, 50x. More than that, actually. But, you know, and I'm sure it will happen again. This will never change. You know, I remember, you know, back in the stock market, I ended up playing AMC. So like, we're going to forever have these kind of opportunities. And I think that if you can really adhere to how to play this game and how to actually participate in these, there is no reason why you're going to be left out. At the end of the day, like, it's an easy process. You're the difficulty, not you specifically. I'm talking to like people that they're getting their own way. And that's the biggest challenge that you're going to find. And most people that I meet, it's that they got in their own way and sabotaged themselves out of an opportunity. Self-sabotage is real, guys. It's very real. So when you come across a great idea, you got to write it down, review it over and over and over again until it gets submerged into your mind. And life will present you with the same scenarios that you potentially made mistakes in the past. And if you've learned the lesson, it turns into profit. If you haven't learned the lesson, it's no longer it's not profit again, and you're going to suffer again until you learn the lesson. And so there's a learning curve to this game, but I think that for most people, if you just stick with it, you're going to end up coming out on top. There's no way unless you have an inoperable brain that doesn't learn. So I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, really good. I think the key with what you were just saying at the last point is that you need to go through at least one full market cycle generally to learn all of the lessons. And one market cycle complete doesn't guarantee you're now ready, because some of the lessons you might take multiple market cycles to learn. Maybe you never learn them. And you know, it can be the difference between one mistake that you forgot to learn that puts you at 10 million or, you know, negative, right? If that one little mistake could end up blowing up your account, or it could end up making you millions. And if you don't learn that lesson, this one little lesson could destroy you. And I think just to summarize basically what Quantum's been saying here, he bought SHIB, had 2% of the supply, made tons of money, could have made a lot more, but obviously there's issues with dealing with the portfolio as it grows that large. Imagine having $20 million in a literal fucking photo of a dog coin, like a total scam, and trying to figure out where to sell that when there has been 0 coins outside of Doge that have ever gone up that large. And, you know, you learn a lot of lessons doing that. And like Quantum was saying, the thesis for SHIB is similar to the thesis for Toshi. I'm not sure, I don't think you exactly explained your thesis for SHIB that you had at the time, but I'll ask you that later. But the thesis for SHIB, in my opinion, was Doge was like the dog of Bitcoin in a way, even though it's built on Litecoin. It's like its own independent dog. Why doesn't Ethereum have its own dog coin, right? Why is there just some separate dog coin? Shouldn't Ethereum have its own one? That would be the thesis for SHIB. And now the thesis for Toshi is that, well, you know, it's not just Ethereum anymore. There's actually other chains which are getting a lot of these users and volume. So why doesn't Satoshi have a very significant market cap if base is going to be so big this bull run? It's the same thesis, not repeating but rhyming. Instead of it being on Ethereum, it's being on base. It's like it's a similar style of thesis, but across a different market cycle, it's a different